their work in an increasingly dangerous climate in many parts of the world. They don't have a lot of the military capability surrounding them that our people in uniform do. They're out on a wire, and that's one of the reasons that we admire their work so much. But the ambassador wanted to be close to the Libyan people, and that's a risky thing. But I think he understood the risks, and I have nothing but admiration for him.
We'll go to Bob in Jacksonville, Florida, Democratic caller. Hi, Bob.
Good morning, you people. How you doing?
Doing well.
Good morning.
Listen, I saw a documentary on embassies attacks, throughout the history. Can you hear me?
We can, Bob.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't want to do it now. I'm looking at your faces. Anyway, it was the complete documentary going all the way back to the Clinton administration through now. And during the last administration, the Bush administration, there was 11 embassies attacked, and there was 88 people killed. Now, Benghazi wasn't even an embassy, so they had a footnote at the end of it that said there were several outposts. There was one outpost attacked at Benghazi, but it wasn't an embassy. Anyway, they did these interviews with all of these Republicans after the attacks on these embassies, like John McCain, Lindsey Graham, several people that's on your board right now. It's laughable what they were saying then.
Okay, all right, Congressman Schiff.
Well, I have to say that watching the Benghazi hearings that we've had so far, particularly in government reform, hasn't been very edifying. It's mostly consisted of a lot of grandstanding. The hearings that we've had in the Intelligence Committee, I think, have been far more substantive and have focused more on what the intelligence community can tell us now about the hunt for these people. We've certainly done our share of looking at who created the talking points and going through all that. We've had Director Morell testify many times in closed session and open session. But I think they've been far less partisan than some of the open hearings. And that's a bit of an indictment about the process that you only have the grandstanding when the cameras are available. And in closed session in the Intel Committee, it's much more of a matter-of-fact kind of investigation. But again, I come back to where I started in the beginning, which is looking at the words of the chairman of the Armed Services Committee, the Republican chairman, and the words of the speaker until recently, which is, what's the point of yet another committee to have months and months of hearings at taxpayer expense to cover the same ground we've covered innumerable times?
Peg on Twitter, GOP never criticizes General Petraeus for intelligence talking points. Interesting. What was the role of the former CIA director?
Well, that's a great question and something that I've raised as well. I have great admiration for General Petraeus' service. I think he's a very dedicated, patriotic American. But the reality is that he had the same conclusion that the rest of the intelligence community had at the time, which was this began as a protest, that there were certainly attacks. So we all viewed it as a terror attack by definition. And I think recognize that when you're shooting RPGs at a diplomatic facility, that's a terror attack. The question really wasn't, was it a terror attack? The question was, who was responsible and why? And additional questions were, why didn't we have better security? But in those days immediately after the attacks, when he came in to brief us, he basically said exactly what we heard in the talking points from Susan Rice. So it is interesting. The GOP wants to go after Susan Rice. They want to go after the president. And why? Because they don't want to go after a general who's well respected. And that tells you something about the political character of what's going on.
Well, I know you need to leave this morning, so I just want to bounce this off of you. Get your take on NSA legislation that's making its way through the House. There's bipartisan legislation. What would it do, and do you support it?
Well, I do. I like what the Judiciary Committee has put out yesterday. On the Intelligence Committee today, we're going to mark up our legislation as well. But the bill that is passed in Judiciary and the bill that I expect us to mark up ends the bulk collection of metadata. For quite some time, I've been urging that the telecommunications providers hold their own data. So it would move to that model. It requires in the Judiciary bill prior court approval before you can search that data. In the intelligence bill, it doesn't require prior court review. That's something I'm trying to change, and I'm hoping that we can get a majority vote in the Intelligence Committee to follow the model where a prior court approval of a search is required except in emergencies.
Okay. One last phone call here for you. Lindegard in Georgetown, South Carolina, Republican caller. You're on the air with Congressman Adam Schiff. Go ahead. You know what? You got to turn that television down. Go ahead, caller. All right. Let me go to Jack in Davenport, Iowa, Democratic caller. Jack, are you ready?
Yes.
All right. Go ahead.
Al-Qaeda typically attacks just before an election. For instance, that Spanish train attack that killed, I think it was 500 people just before a Spanish election. Are Republicans playing into the hands of Al-Qaeda to let Al-Qaeda affect an American election? In other words, are Republicans aiding and abetting Al-Qaeda?
Well, no, I wouldn't say that they're aiding and abetting Al-Qaeda. You know, I do think that Al-Qaeda is very much aware of what's going on politically around the world, and certainly bears that in mind when they plan their attacks or time their attacks. The attacks in Benghazi, though, I think were probably more related to the anniversary of 9/11 than the presidential election. And as well related potentially to what was going on around the world in terms of all of those protests. Ayman al-Zawahiri, the then number 2, or now number 2, that bin Laden is gone, in Al-Qaeda, now the number 1, called for attacks on the anniversary of 9/11. So, you know, that plainly may have been a very significant motivation behind those that were involved.
Congressman, real quick, Boko Haram in Nigeria, is this group a threat?
It's absolutely a threat, and it's one of the most violent and despicable organizations on earth. We're going to do everything we can to help Nigeria. The Secretary of State's been very strong on this. We're sharing intelligence, and we're going to have advisors on the ground to help find these girls, help the Nigerian government obtain their release. It's just completely appalling what's happening, and yes, we should be very concerned about them.
Congressman Adam Schiff, thank you for your time.
It's a pleasure.
Appreciate
Thank you.
it.